Mics are hot.
Welcome, everybody.
There we go. We are live. Still working things out, but yes, we are very much live, John. Hello.
Hello. I was thrown off. How are you?
Doing very well. Welcome, everybody, to this week's Café Hangout.
We are here live from the post office. We are going to be taking your phone calls. We're going to have a number of guests on, and we are going to be discussing all the latest news, which there's no shortage of today. One really big story that we will be breaking down and discussing and hopefully hearing from you.
Yeah.
On the show today, we're going to be joined, as always, by Damian Abraham, the host of The Wrestlers on Viceland, to chat about the episodes that aired on Wednesday night, the penultimate week of the series, which will wrap up next week. And also joining us, a former WWE writer and also someone that is no stranger to the post office, Brian Mann, will be on, as we are going to be discussing this big announcement from WWE about the new executive directors for Raw and SmackDown. This news came out on Thursday morning, first reported by SI.com. The WWE has since issued their own press release naming Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff as the new executive directors. I'm just going to read it here from their own release. WWE has named Paul Heyman as Executive Director of Monday Night Raw and Eric Bischoff as Executive Director of SmackDown Live, newly created positions reporting directly to WWE Chairman and CEO Vince McMahon. In their executive roles, Heyman and Bischoff will oversee the creative development of WWE's flagship programming and ensure integration across all platforms and lines of business. The creation of these roles further establishes WWE's ability to continuously reinvent its global brand while providing two distinct creative processes for its flagship shows. And they go on to run through the resumes of Heyman and Bischoff. This is not a storyline. These are positions that, as it says in the release, are being created. It is certainly comes across as a big reaction to where things are right now. The perception that is there among viewers of Raw and SmackDown that something was necessary. And I think the biggest question, this is going to bear itself out over the next number of weeks, is how much autonomy these two truly have, or are these simply going to be writers that are put relatively high on the food chain, that ultimately this is still a Vince McMahon run show, which from all intents and purposes, that is still the case, that he is still the final editor and the final line of defense when it comes to what is getting onto television.
Not for a second do I think, with this news comes, Vince McMahon completely handing the reins over to either Paul Heyman or Eric Bischoff. I think what we are going to get is maybe slightly different changes to the format, but I'm not expecting that much of a change. I can't expect that much.
I mean, week one, you have to do certain things that I think this absolutely in the short term helps next week's viewership. I think there's going to be
a great deal of buzz,
tons of buzz and curiosity. Yeah. But I mean, the last time I had it explained to me how the writing structure looks like, try and picture this. I think I've gone over this before. Was at the top. Like in those production meetings, it was like Vince, Paul Levesque, and Kevin Dunn. That was kind of your top level. And obviously Vince is the one that's pretty much calling the shots at the end. Beneath him was Dave Kapoor, who is the Senior Vice President of Creative. Now, below that, you had the head writers of each brand, lead writers below that, then your regular writing staff, and the writer's assistants. So that's kind of your pyramid that you can sketch out in your head.
So where are Heyman and Bischoff going to be
Well,
positioned?
that's an interesting question. In the outline, it says they will report directly to Vince McMahon. In theory, that would put them second in line, right behind that top tier. And how that affects other people's roles, like a Dave Kapoor. I'd be curious how that affects his work dynamic, how he is working with these two, and many questions. I think it's only once we see this executed of how this is going to happen. And you have two distinct personalities here that are being put in, one of which is Paul Heyman, that is there every week. He has been heavily involved with WWE Creative for a while. And then on the polar opposite is Eric Bischoff, who is we're going to see how much has this guy been following the product. Like, he's coming into this cold.
Does not surprise me at all that they would consider Paul Heyman, considering that he's already, pretty much plays a very active role within the company already. Eric Bischoff is a name that's really come completely out of left field, and I'm trying to think, why of all people that are within their system, why not Triple H? Why not, so and so? Why not Bruce Pritchard? But Eric Bischoff, the selection of him as in this position is really curious, and I can only imagine that maybe they wanted to play up some sort of Monday night or like Attitude Era dynamic by having the ECW figurehead with the WCW figurehead in charge. I have to imagine some of that might play into what we're going to get on air.
Well, also, like, this is also not some change in power that just slipped out. They made this a very public announcement today, and I think wanted names that are going to get the most attention from lapsed fans, and I think that's where Bischoff finds himself here. I mean, the last time we got to see this guy who had, he pretty much had the reins of creative in TNA for a period of time, and we saw what the end result was. Yeah. I mean, and he's largely been away from any kind of day-to-day wrestling job since he left Impact. Outside of his podcast, which we are told will continue. So much like Bruce Pritchard will continue. But I think that those
podcasts will be really interesting, I guess, right now.
Yeah, I mean,
no, depending on how much they're able to talk about.
I don't think you're going to hear much about present day thing. I mean, these are nostalgia podcasts that I think that's why they are continuing to do them. It's not going to. It would be much different if Eric Bischoff was doing a day after SmackDown podcast. You know what I mean? So I think that these were done. Certainly names that I think ultimately were names that Vince McMahon feels comfortable with giving this power to. Mm-hmm. But also, I mean, with it comes the criticism that where is the WWE's next generation of creative minds? Mm-hmm. Like, you have people on the writing staff that are youthful, but not for a position like this. And they're like, if you want to make radical changes, is this going to bring about it? I think that you're going to get optimism regarding Heyman, and I think a lot of skepticism regarding Bischoff. Mm-hmm. And 6 weeks from now, we may be right back and realize that these were largely, what was this, a cosmetic change, or are these roles that really have teeth attached to them?
The fact that this news it comes so publicly through, a Sports Illustrated article, which I'm sure...
And the company itself.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like, they were doing this as something to point
release,
to.
Basically.
They wanted attention for this. We are actively making changes.
Suggests to me that My cynicism tells me this is more of just a cosmetic change, much like the wild card rule, much like, whatever 24/7 title. To me, this is just kind of next in line in that type of, how can
it's the latest reset, and we're going to find out if it's an effective one. But this is, you can't do another brand split because you've basically done one. This is as close as we get to almost doing another reset. And whether this means kind of what's going to happen with these commercial breaks, is that going to continue throughout both? Are you really going to see differences between the shows? Are we going to see distinct rosters now? And most important to me is the fact that they're positioning Eric Bischoff, in theory, in a position of power going into Fox.
Yeah. How, I'm very curious to know, perhaps internally, how people feel about something like that. No doubt somebody like Paul Heyman commands a great deal of respect. Is that same level of reverence given to somebody like Eric Bischoff, who's just stepping into the company after a long time? My other question is, where's Paul Levesque in all this? Of anybody back there who might be able to, helm a company, you figure Triple H would kind of be that person next in line.
Well, I mean, Paul Levesque is still very much Vince's lieutenant. He is there at all these TVs unless, scheduling prevents it. So it's not like he is non-existent here in this whole structure. I mean, him, Vince, and Kevin Dunn lead these production meetings. So, I mean, he's there. He's in the center of it. And in some ways is not necessarily being exposed, maybe in the sense in terms of someone that is being linked to. I think it might be a very smart political move that he is not in one of these featured roles. Yeah. Heyman, I find it interesting as well, because this is a guy that has been very careful about decisions he's made to insulate himself from any potential failures. Mm-hmm. And this is one where, he is putting himself in the public position that this is now Heyman's vision, not all that different from when ECW relaunched, that he was the public face of a brand that he was realizing he did not have autonomy over, and it became the WWE and Vince McMahon's vision of ECW, and he was the poster child for it. That was the public face of it, and that's kind of what they're spinning here, is that this is Heyman's show, and with it comes the positive and the negative, that it's all going to be on his shoulders.
Also curious is that the article specifically mentions that Bischoff will be involved with Fox in dealing with the transition to SmackDown. What do you make of that? And the fact that it's Eric Bischoff instead of Paul Heyman being put in that role?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard, because what does that entail? Ultimately, do I feel that Eric Bischoff will be tasked with making unilateral decisions on behalf of the company? I don't.
No way.
I think that's... I think ultimately, like, this is... I don't view this as Vince McMahon handing over the reins.
Yeah,
I think ultimately they would have made that very clear. If we have a phone call, let's start off.
Let's go to our first phone call. By the way, phone lines are open, everybody. We are going to be taking them for the next few minutes. 1-732-800-4423, or search us on Skype. Post Wrestling. We want to hear from you. Our first caller, Jake. What's up? Hello, Jake. Can you hear us?
Good to talk to you again. How are you doing?
Hey, very well. What do you think of this news?
Man, I was very when I woke up this morning and heard about this the news. I was genuinely surprised, knowing that how much Paul Heyman, like considering how Paul Heyman and his past issues with creative back then, and starting to lash out, and he lashed out on the plane ride with Vince.
Let's be clear though. This is not Paul Heyman coming out of nowhere. Like he's been at these TVs. He has a role in creative and producing. Like this is not Paul Heyman. He has not been strictly a performer for a while.
Okay, just wondering about that, but just curious about this. Regarding this, Paul Heyman is a competitive guy. Eric Bischoff is a really competitive guy. And obviously, how much do you think Vince is going to give? Vince is going to give both of these guys the amount of liberties that he's going to allow them to have? Would you say?
Thanks for the call, Jake. We got a few of them, so we're gonna hang up and answer your question.
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question that everyone is going to be asking, and it would not surprise me if even those involved are wondering like what it's ultimately going to be once they're in the midst of all this, and seeing when there's a big battle over something, who ultimately wins out.
Yeah. Our next caller, what's up? You're on the line.
Hey, this is Jay from Colorado.
Hey, Jay.
Hey, I got to say, I haven't really been watching the main roster product a lot over the last month. Been catching highlights and reviews for you guys, but I'm fairly excited about the news this morning, and even more so, this seems like the exciting conclusion of the invasion angle from the 2000s.
Yes, after 20
finally,
years.
Heyman and Bischoff and the Alliance are now controlling things.
Well, that is kind of the underlying theme to this, Jay.
Oh, no, did I lose you guys? Hello?
No.
Oh.
No, we're here. We can hear you. But thank you for the call.
We'll try and reconnect.
Yeah.
But, no, it's it's going back to an era that I think a lot of fans want to see kind of progress past, and ultimately it's going to come down to new ideas. And again, I'm going to keep going back to it, the autonomy factor that I think anyone would be skeptical that there's going to be plenty of, and maybe we'll be surprised.
It's to me just it's part nostalgia, and I think delivering the type of reaction that Jay conveyed here from lapsed fans who perhaps really enjoyed that period and want to see things shaken up.
It's
again.
big with callers.
Huge with callers. We're getting a ton of response. Caller, you're on the line. You're on the Post Wrestling Cafe. What's up?
Yo, what's going on? It's Hansy.
Of course it is. Hansy, how are you?
I'm good. I'll be quick. I know you guys are strapped for time, so I'll be quick. I just want to say that it's coming across, like, to me at least, that how the comparisons to WCW have been put out there more. It feels like, at least in the real life situation, that this is like when Vince Russo and Bischoff came on television. Like, do you think it'll actually do anything, or do you guys actually think this is just like another Band-Aid. Like, listen, I'm intrigued by Bischoff coming back and all that. It kind of puts my theory to, a test that maybe there will be a TNA invasion, but do you guys think this long-term will actually work out, or do you guys think that this is going to be like another thing that McMahon micromanages? And I'll leave you with that. Take it easy, guys.
Thank you, Hansi.
I think the real test is going to be, if these guys stay in these positions, everyone believes Vince McMahon is not taking his eye off the ball or his hands off the product this year. Now, next year when the XFL launches, that's an interesting test. Mm-hmm. Is there going to become a factor where, in the absence of Vince, when there are TVs he cannot make, who is running the show? Is Paul Levesque put in his place? Because that's typically how it works right now. Sure. It's like Paul Levesque is second in command. How they will gel. I think people have to be expecting that if you're an Eric Bischoff, if you're a Paul Heyman, you have to understand you're not coming in here to be a disruptor. You have to make your own fingerprints felt, but do so within the system of WWE and working within the system, which is that fine dance that I think Vince McMahon feels these two have been able to learn how to navigate that WWE system and play within their rule book. And it's a very different Paul Heyman today than maybe Paul Heyman of 2001, 2002. And then, the guy getting sent home.
And what about Eric Bischoff? He's not necessarily coming in. Yeah, he has that experience, but that experience is from more than a decade ago.
Yeah, I cannot imagine it is going to be Eric Bischoff sitting down, writing out 2 hours of television. I think he comes with a lot of trepidation, if you are someone watching this, of how he is going to update his listen, maybe this guy has had a lot of great ideas. Maybe he's going to come in here and surprise a lot of people. Maybe he's not even going to get the chance to. I think that Eric Bischoff, as an on-screen performer, is a tremendous performer. I would think that it's only a matter of time before he does have an on-screen role. And I think that ultimately comes down to the weight of what this job entails, and if that's even something that should be entertained, because in theory, this is something that's going to require all of his attention.
Let's go to one more phone call before we get to Brian Mann. Chris from LA, you're on the cafe. What's up?
Hey, what's up, guys? I woke up to this news. I just don't know how I feel about Eric Bischoff, not so much Paul Heyman. I think that Paul Heyman is adaptable, and I do think that Paul Heyman is going to be good at writing for that audience of one, which is Vince McMahon. Mm-hmm. I think he would be able to handle the intricacies of dealing with McMahon. Hey, Bischoff, I'm not just with Bischoff. I saw this guy in TNA, and I always thought that if he had a chance to come back to a prominent role in wrestling, he would do things differently. But he brought in Hogan. They got Val Venus in TNA, who had been jobbing in WWE for the greater part of the last 5 years or so, and he's beating Christopher Daniels and stuff like that. So I'm not saying he's going to be a horrible fit. I'm just not sure about it.
Yeah, I think that Eric Bischoff. I think the idea that someone can go away for a long time and then come back and you give them the benefit of the doubt. I think his TNA run really I don't think there's a lot of excuses that come out of that. That guy had a major direction in TNA for 3 years, and you saw what happened in that company during that time. There was some good, there was a lot of bad, and it was ultimately, I don't think, a successful period that you look back on that would necessarily make him a prime candidate for this position that you're looking at. But again, I think that this is ultimately, these jobs are going to define themselves over the next 2 months, and we're going to see what kind of impact these two are going to be able to have, much less even what they want to push through. It's not a case of just, hey, here are your television shows, have at it. It's never going to be like that in WWE.
What we're seeing right now, though, I mean, it will be very different from even the last time there was that these guys might have been involved in a brand split, because they'll be dealing presumably with the same roster. How's that going to play out?
Listen, there's many questions of the on-screen product and how this works, going back and forth between both. If you are going to have more of a rigid roster now between the two, you've just introduced this wild card thing. Is that slowly going to disappear or maybe rapidly disappear? I think it makes Monday's Raw certainly very interesting, because I think you almost have to come out, because you've made this public. I think Heyman almost has to start the show with like a mission statement and really I think you almost need these two to be on-screen faces as well to really cement this for people that they're seeing something different, or at least that's the perception they really want to drive home by making this such a public story.
Joining us in the cafe right now is our good friend and former WWE creative member, Brian Mann. Give us your take on this news, Brian.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. Can't believe we're doing a whole episode about the Democratic debate. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Man, instead of Cory Booker, we're talking about the Raw and SmackDown bookers.
Yeah, no, this was interesting. I got a text from a friend of mine with a tweet that contained this information, but from from a Twitter account that I, kind of been hit or miss with wrestling news. So I was like, who knows? And then 5 minutes later comes out the Sports Illustrated story that has official confirmation from the company. I think this shows a certain level of desperation that they're actually making this a public story, that they're, talking to Sports Illustrated, tweeting it out, releasing a press statement. They clearly understand what the perception is. And it's just very interesting that they're making this a public announcement, not just something that they feel they need to, take care of it in the back end. They're getting desperate.
Yeah, it's an interesting move. I understand why they did make it so public. I mean, it's going to have an impact next week on their viewership. I think there's going to be plenty of people that, as many skeptics as you want regarding this story, that are still going to tune in out of curiosity now to see what kind of changes, be it wholesale or completely fabricated, actually make its way onto the screen. This is kind of that latest reset, and they don't have a whole lot of resets that they can play now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I tweeted out that I think they need to do, if I'm Heyman, and he's in a tough spot because he can't really be an on-screen character, I don't think, because he already has an on-screen role. If I'm them, one of the first things I do is, hey guys, we're gonna shake things up. You guys are gonna be getting the Extreme Rules main event tonight on Raw, and just do that mixed tag and just get it out of the way, and be able to move on to some. Because realistically, Becky and Seth should be their two biggest stars, and just move on to try to get some worthwhile competitors for them. I mean, obviously, I spent a lot of time watching the 2000 Nitros. I don't think they need to do the April 10th reboot of stripping everyone of their titles, but I do think they need to very quickly start to make the pivot into some more worthwhile programs for these performers.
Hey, what's the updated version of Eric Bischoff making the scissors joke to Sid? Is it going up to Seth Rollins and calling him little guy?
I think it might be that. I think it might be asking him if he can, if he's going to take his ball and go home, that sort of a thing. The thing, I know a lot of people have concentrated kind of on the potential negative here. Heyman has been back in a creative capacity at the company for a while. From what I've heard, people at the company, mixed results. And then Bischoff, last time we saw him working for someone, it was TNA, and I think that work kind of spoke for itself. The big thing that I hope these roles can do is that when you watch the TV and when you listen to, that Jon Moxley interview, it's very clear that their production process is just broken. They have a completely inefficient workflow. Scripts are being thrown out at the last minute. It's a broken system that they have right now. So even creative choices, who they decide to push, what angles they do, all of that aside, I hope the thing that both these guys can do, because agree or disagree with them, they do have significant experience running an operation like this. And hopefully the first thing they can do is kind of come in, reevaluate things, and just reorganize it so that there isn't a situation like we saw with Road Dogg, where he quit because he was frustrated of spending all this time just to get it thrown out at the last minute. So hopefully, the big thing I'm hoping for is they can just fix a lot of the chaos backstage and just help right the ship and make it work in a way that actually makes sense.
It's a great point, Brian, and it's I'm sure you've talked to people there. I certainly hear it that it's, sometimes we focus so much on the performers having to deal with certain restrictions, and it's not always ideal what they would like the situation to be. It's also like that on the creative end too, that, you know, that there are plenty of talented people that work there, but it's finding how to work within that system that some may perceive as flawed. And I mean, you were there yourself. Like, that can be a frustrating point too, if you're a member on that staff, and it can be very frustrating at times when it comes to ideas changing on a dime. And I think ultimately we're going to keep coming back to what kind of power Heyman and Bischoff are really coming in here with, if it's ultimately the same showrunner at the end of the line.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to keep a real eye out for any reports that come out next Tuesday or Wednesday about what was the workflow backstage. If this is a situation where, you know, I think everyone's kind of heard about how the production meeting works. I mean, you have all these people in the room ahead of the show, and then at the top, you know, the front table, you got Vince, you got I don't know if Hunter is still there, but you got Kevin Dunn. Is this a situation where they're just throwing another chair up at that table, or is this a situation where Vince is not at the production meeting and it's Heyman or Bischoff running that meeting, and then they go and give a report to Vince, or maybe Vince isn't even at the building? It'll be interesting to see, because the big thing that I've sort of said for a long time is that Vince has so many things going on right now. He's got his first competition in years. He's got these sliding ratings. He's also decided that he's still running the business side of this company. He's still the CEO and chairman. Plus, he's also launching this XFL thing. Not to mention the fact that he is massively out of touch with his audience, and he is in his mid-70s. Any one of those things would be a lot to deal with. And I think, just honestly, for the creative process, him just being removed is really the best thing for a period of time. And maybe it's a situation where, you know, I don't see this happening, but maybe it's, hey, Bischoff, Heyman, you guys run things on the ground, and we'll reevaluate in a month and see where we're at. Because I think Vince not physically being there would really go a long way. But at the very least, I hope he's not in the production meetings.
You know, presuming like these are roles that are really going to have some significance behind them in terms of the influence that they will have. Do you like the timing that, you know, we're going into the summer? We're really, television numbers can be thrown out. Everything is about the fall. Do you think this is the right time to install these kinds of positions so that hopefully you have something that is resembling an updated product come September, and especially by October, where this company is entering its most important television deal it's ever signed?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at, because I mean, I would like to know when these decisions were made. Was this a snap rush decision of like, oh my God, you know, how bad the ratings were this past Monday with like less than a 2% increase for the night after a pay-per-view?
I don't think this happened like overnight or anything like that. Like, it's been discussed for some time. I don't know when it was actually finalized, but like, this isn't a case of, you know, last week Vince just came up with this. It doesn't sound like that was the case.
Right, but like the decision to make it public and the decision to draw attention to it, rather than just sort of being a thing like, oh, hey, some wrestling sites reported that Bruce Pritchard is back, you know? I do think that the hiring of Bischoff and the fact that they specifically highlighted that a large part of his role will be working directly with Fox, I think is a real acknowledgement of them just saying, hey, Vince can't do this. Vince can't do it all. And I think that's such an important relationship. And again, they've just gotten to the point where running these 5 hours of TV can't be Vince's side job. It needs to be someone's full-time, completely dedicated focus. They're not worried about a football league. They're not worried about running the business end of things. They are just dealing with the creative of this show. And, I mean, if we're looking in terms of guys that have experience working with wrestlers, organizing a team, these two are very good. You know, their personal creative taste aside.
From a production standpoint, Brian, do you expect there to be much difference between Raw and SmackDown? I mean, as far as we know, all the technical people, Kevin Dunn probably still involved with everything. But what changes do you expect in terms of presentation?
Right off the bat, I hope both of them. I hope we kind of pull back on that wild card rule. First of all, I hope that both shows have their own sort of feelings and their own sort of rosters, and they're unique rosters. And I would love to see maybe some of the 205 Live guys start to be shown on SmackDown a little bit. I think it'd be really great for them to just first kind of define what their identity is, unfortunately, when it comes to production, I don't think we're going to see much of a change there. I think they are so kind of locked into what their house style is. I mean, even look down at NXT, and the aesthetic choices are very slight in terms of how things are different. I mean, backstage stuff still kind of is shot the same. In-ring stuff is shot the same. And other than the fact their graphics being like a little glitchy, overall it's the same aesthetic. So I don't think production-wise anything's going to really change.
Do you see Brian a more kind of public face now of creative in Heyman and Eric Bischoff, that this, for so long it's like that aspect of the company's business has always just been kind of hidden, but slowly we've seen, that video popped up of the creative staff talking about the that kind of PR reel. And do you see Heyman and Bischoff being sent out more to do certain types of media and kind of attach two faces now to the creative process?
It's tough. I mean, Bischoff is such kind of he's a double-edged sword. He can be his own worst enemy sometimes. I think he's great when he's on camera. He's very well spoken. He's the kind of guy that you can put out there who could say, if something came up where he needed to talk to the news or something like that, he's great for that. He's going to be amazing at working with Fox. But then he's also one of these dudes who jumps on Twitter and, kind of puts his foot in his mouth sometimes. Heyman's been a little better at not being publicly out there with that sort of a thing. I've thought for a long time that letting people know who the writers of these stories are could actually be kind of a positive for them. I think letting people actually get excited about some of this, people don't, bleed it and put it on screen or anything like that. But I think it's an interesting way to allow people to invest in the product. I remember, was it 5 or 6 years ago, they did a thing where some of the creative members did a panel at Comic-Con, and it was a one-time only thing. They never did it again.
Yeah.
But I do think that, I think you look at AEW, and I don't think they're going to go fully in this direction, but the fact that those guys are on Twitter and interact with fans, and I was hanging out with some friends watching Stomping Grounds actually the other day, and one thing that I pointed out that makes AEW so different from WWE is that AEW, you can tell, is dedicated to making their fans happy and keeping their fans watching and just giving the fans what they want. You cannot say that has been the case for WWE. They almost seem resentful of the people who watch their show, and their main tactics lately have been, how do we trick people into watching our show? They have no respect for their audience. And hopefully, I don't know if Heyman and Bischoff will be able to embrace social media in that way, but it needs to stop being so antagonistic. I think they really need to warm themselves up. I think even if you just see what Seth's been doing this past week, it's very clear that they don't know how to have a positive relationship with their audience, and it would be great if Heyman or Bischoff could kind of reverse that.
I will say, Brian, it seems like that particular philosophy is being embraced by Paul Levesque as a part of NXT. Having
100%.
a great relationship with the media, it seems. Where do you kind of see his role being in all this?
I will say I think it's very telling that it is Eric Bischoff and Paul Heyman, and not, say, Paul Levesque and Gabe Sapolsky getting this phone call. I have nothing to base this on at all, but you hear these reports of apparently Paul being kind of agitated with Vince, what's happened with a lot of the call-ups. And I was going to say, I think if Hunter wasn't Vince's son-in-law, I think he would have fired him a long time ago. We know how competitive Vince is, and the fact there's a guy who's working for him, making a superior product, and everyone is begging for him to take over, I think that gets to Vince. And in the past, he would have just fired that person. But he's in a position where he cannot fire Hunter. So I think he's going to keep...
Sorry to interrupt, Brian, but when we go back to someone who kind of had that tag that would not just sit there, but would be, would argue and go back and forth with Vince, that really describes Paul Heyman's run once upon a time. And, while Vince may publicly, those around him say he welcomes those challenges, in the case of Heyman, it wore thin after a while, where it kind of got, the guy was looked upon as someone that didn't choose his battles as wisely. And Paul Levesque, you would imagine, is probably better at picking his battles, but kind of fits that same kind of role.
Yeah, and I think he's also pretty smart in terms of the long game and kind of understanding that, again, he's in this great position where he will never be fired. And I think just kind of buying his time. And the fact that he has been able to pretty much set up a complete satellite company down in Orlando has been pretty smart. And it also seems like he is picking his battles right, where, yeah, he can look and say, wow, you're really misusing Aleister Black and Ricochet and a lot of these call-ups, but we don't really hear about fights between them over that kind of stuff.
Brian, we want to thank you very much for jumping on. Great to get your perspective on this. And I think that ultimately this is something that no one's going to be able to definitively answer how significant this is until probably, 2 or 3 months, when we can really look at the programming and where it is, where it isn't, and what kind of power these positions hold, because that's going to be a very intriguing element of television throughout the summer now following this news.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, only time will tell. I mean, we'll obviously all be watching next week, seeing if there's any changes. I feel like they have to have some changes,
Yes.
just to, give credence to the press releases and everything. So that'll be interesting. I mean, the fear is that, is this a situation like WCW bringing in, Bill Watts? Is this going a little too far into the past? We'll see. But thank you for having me, guys.
You can follow him at Brian Max Mann, and maybe he's going to be providing us some threads on what should happen on Raw or SmackDown. I look forward to it, Brian. Always great to catch up with you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Momentarily, we will be joined by our next guest, but after we chat with Damian, we will go through the cards that are coming up this weekend. Ring of Honor is going to be holding their Best in the World pay-per-view on Friday night from Baltimore. And then Saturday night, it is Fyter Fest as All Elite Wrestling comes back with their second show. Seems like they certainly own this weekend in terms of the interest of any wrestling or MMA for that matter. I think that this is one that everyone is going to be looking at how much of a follow-up this is to Double or Nothing, whether that's a fair comparison or not. But there's a lot of eyes on this show on Saturday.
As a second show, absolutely. It'll be very telling, what some of their booking decisions might be going forward. Joining us on the line right now on the cafe, our good friend, Damian Abraham. What's up?
The executive director of Viceland Wrestling Programming, Damian Abraham.
That's not really the credit that I got on the show, but I'll go with it, John. I'm definitely going to go with it.
I thought they were going to issue a press release today to announce you as their new executive director.
No, I am just still co-producer, creator, and host. But
Yeah,
I'll take those too.
It'll be Viceland's brand split. It'll be between the Wrestlers and Dark Side of the Ring.
Ooh.
That would be amazing. I'd like to see us each controlling a different night, because we do have, like Bischoff and Paul Heyman, two completely different philosophies about pro wrestling.
Will we get a wild card? Damian will show up. Gino Hernandez will show up on.
Well, Gino Hernandez is not going to show up on either show.
I want to. If we do get a wild card, I want Jim Cornette to come over, and I want him to hang out with Jun Kasai for a little bit.
Are there any crossovers? Are there any people you interviewed that also were on Dark Side of the Ring, or was it were there no wild cards? I don't think there
are any.
I don't think there are. As
some strictly different products.
Yeah, look at that. You guys did the brand split better. We've got 1 week to go, Damian, and this week I think that this is one. I'm curious what the response level has been like for the first episode we're going to talk about, the craziest wrestling in Japan. This is pretty much an hour dedicated to DDT, and to me, maybe the most interesting wrestler in the world, Kota Ibushi. I mean, I could watch a 3-hour documentary of this guy sitting and just talking about what he thinks about anything, and I think it would be must-see television.
Yeah, he has just got this incredibly captivating presence. And, and that's the thing. He could be reading the phone book and it would still be interesting. But to hear him talk about pro wrestling and his approach to pro wrestling, like I remember doing that interview with friend of the show, Chris Charlton, as well, present, kind of doing the translating. And both of us just being in awe of, like, the experience of sitting in his apartment, getting to just geek out with him about pro wrestling and, like, his approach to it. And also just on a larger level, his approach to art and creativity, and just kind of hearing, how this one of the great artists of our time in the medium of pro wrestling approaches this medium.
Did you get to go to the secret dojo of Kota Ibushi's that is like off in the woods somewhere?
We did. It's definitely a trek. And on the way back, I didn't pee before we left, and I nearly peed my pants in the ride back. And Chris Charlton did not help trying to make me pee myself repeatedly on that ride.
You didn't have a golden shower.
Oh
no, I didn't.
Man, I'm on fire today.
Damn.
You are, John. This is like John's working blue tonight. I apologize for your poor ears.
Oh, dude, I'm used to it. I like it. You mentioned Kota Ibushi kind of really being like an artist inside the ring, and I think this whole episode by extension, there's no real better place for him to kind of exercise that type of craft than a company like DDT, where to me, like, I always regarded DDT as sort of, oh, okay, it's that like comedy wrestling league where that does like crazy wrestling. But if you watch this episode and you hear Sanshiro Takagi talk about the philosophy behind it, it really is more of a promotion to me that seems to encourage free thinking and free creativity, no matter what that is. And it just so happens to be, and oftentimes, comedy. But first of all, why did you choose DDT to focus on for this particular episode?
I think just being a fan of pro wrestling, in the last few years, and just you couldn't help but be aware of DDT. Like, as you say, and I think we even say in the episode, the most creatively free wrestling company in the world, like by outward appearances, or that I knew of at the time, and it's somewhere that someone like Kenny Omega, someone that was basically bullied out of American wrestling, could go and just be himself and find himself and become the wrestler he's become. And I think you see that with Kota Ibushi. You see that with a lot of American wrestlers, like Joey Ryan. Obviously had a lot of success. He had that, short little run in TNA as well beforehand, but it's really that penis plex with, or the U-porn plex now, I guess, right? Or Pornhub plex.
Yes.
U-porn. That really put him on the map, like that was in DDT. That was with Dino. And so it's this place where I think wrestlers can go be themselves and find themselves and still put on incredible wrestling matches. Like, that's the thing, is like a lot of people take shots at it for, the fact that these guys put on these wrestling matches with a doll. But, what's the famous quote? Like, if you can put on a great wrestling match with a broomstick, you're a great wrestler. And I think this is that taken to the logical extreme. And, to see these guys put on these matches with this doll, that is truly wrestling at its highest level.
How was it to deal with DDT itself and kind of be like, you were pretty much, if you were going to do a 1 hour special on DDT at this time period when Kota's still there, like, you got to speak to pretty much the central figures. I mean, how was it just dealing with the actual promotion and how open they were to allowing you in to kind of explore their entire company?
Once again, I think we were really lucked out with timing, because this was just before DDT signed that deal with that streaming service that took it to kind of a different place. So at this point, we were still dealing with Takagi-san and just the DDT front office. And we called him, and it was actually after Kota had left. But we still kind of, we talked to them and then talked to Kota kind of separately, and felt that to tell the story of DDT, we kind of had to tell the story of Kota Ibushi, just because, the two kind of go hand in hand. And he's certainly, for Western viewers like myself, the most, present of all of their aces that they've had. Certainly more than like someone like Harashima, no disrespect to Harashima. So, we just kind of hit them up, and it was, once we got there and once we were backstage at these shows, there were a lot more restrictions that we were kind of dealing with, but we kind of were hands off on how we handled things. They let us kind of deal with the wrestlers and just kind of go from there. And there were a couple of guys that just didn't show up for shoots. Like, it was amazing how different it was dealing with DDT than, say, Stardom or Freedoms, where, everything was very regimented. And with DDT, it was regimented, but there was also like a certain level of, well, these guys are their own bosses.
One of the guys who did show up for multiple shoots, it seems, was Danshoku Dino, who
was very hands-on.
Very hands-on. My nipple still rings out in pain.
I'm very curious, what were your particular discussions with the producers of the wrestlers in dealing with a character like Danshoku Dino, who, if he was ever presented outside of the context of DDT, if WWF ever had a character like his, I think there'd be tons of outrage. And, for an outlet like Vice, what were your discussions in trying to present this character while, conveying what his appeal is, but at the same time maybe answering how it is that it works in Japan, but if it was in North America, a lot of people might be kind of upset.
Yeah, I think before we went over there, and this is probably my fault, there was more of an antagonistic kind of relationship with Dino and what role Dino was going to play in the documentary. Just because, from viewing it from my perspective, my Toronto perspective, Canadian perspective, and I think, Nathan and Jeff on their Vancouver perspective viewed it. It was kind of like, oh, this is something that's weird and homophobic and just like all the things that make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up in inversion. And I think once we got over there and to begin to understand the history of Yowie, which I'm brutalizing the pronunciation of, I'm sure, but understanding that there's this whole kind of history of these sort of themes and the idea that, Dino never breaks character. It's not like, he's actually going home to a wife and kids at the end. Like, wrestlers that we talked to, and they might have been working us, who knows? But, there seemed like there was a general confusion about whether or not this is Dino as a character that's just completely divorced from who he is as a person, or Dino as some very hyper caricaturized version of some side of his personality. Like, that seemed to be something that a lot of other wrestlers we talked to really grapple with as well. And I think you see it there. Like, Irie was not into Dino. He says straight up, like, I think it's offensive and I think there's no place for a character like this, but then Kota Ibushi talks about how he's like, still confused about who Dino is as a person. And it was something that I think, leaving Japan, I had a very different take on it than when I went to Japan. I still obviously think it's problematic, but at the same time, I think it's a lot more, I don't know, like, I think WH brought up a great point when he was talking about the Stardom episode with you, John, about just, it's hard to kind of divorce yourself from your cultural biases to view something, and especially something as a straight person, trying to comment on something that's, obviously not from my world. So it was very interesting. It was a very interesting thing to try and tackle.
You also got to talk to Hanae, who was a female super fan of DDT, and you kind of, let the viewer know that DDT happens to appeal to a very large female demographic. And why do you think that is compared to, even something like Stardom or New Japan Pro Wrestling?
I think it's the aforementioned yaoi, which is, this sort of man-on-man gay erotica that's targeted and marketed almost exclusively towards women. And I think that's what DDT is really playing with. And you look through, and it's not just Dino. There's a lot of storylines and a lot of angles and a lot of characters that kind of play with this sort of ambiguous sort of sexuality that kind of runs throughout it. I think it's that. I think it's also the fact that you've got these Adonises in the ring. Like, you go through DDT's roster, and even Dino, who's not as conventionally attractive as, say, someone like Kota Ibushi, but he's still cute, as Takagi points out. And everyone in that company is good looking, and everyone in that company is very personable. And it just, I don't know, there's just like a really fun vibe to those shows. Like, if DDT was in North America, I would go to it all the time. Like, it would just be, if those shows felt really different. And the audience, I would say, is 60% women, 70% women,
wow.
And then there's also, it's very different. And then the beer hall shows are just like a wild party.
Kota also mentions when he's speaking with you that if he had to choose between money and wrestling, he'll always choose wrestling, and even going so far as to say that he could envision a future where it's less about structured promotions and just these talents for hire that can just be going place to place and kind of running themselves in essence. Does it surprise you, looking in hindsight, that we're not only, I think, in North America, are we seeing more of that mindset creep up of those that may be unsatisfied where they are, that their art does take precedence to the dollar figure they're making, but also the fact that here we are and Kota Ibushi has signed a long-term contract with New Japan, and was something that it seemed that Kota was never going to sign a contract.
Yeah, I think Kota eventually signed the contract because it made sense for him, but I think it was, we were shooting this episode in the fallout of the CWC, where you had both Zack Sabre Jr. and Kota Ibushi kind of get to the CWC, obviously be priorities for the WWE, but both walk away, and say, no, we want something else. And you also had the Young Bucks. You had, all these people that were out there on the indies making this money, but you get to the end of the day and you have to decide, like, do you want security or do you want freedom? And I think with Kota Ibushi, if tomorrow New Japan, looked at him funny, I think he'd walk. I still think he's that guy, and I think he's just going to go wherever he feels like the wind's going to take him. Like, going to his apartment, walking in there, seeing how he lives, he doesn't seem like a guy who's got want of a lot of money. You know, he seems like a guy who lives very much within his means, even below where he's able probably to live. And you know, he's doing it because he loves the art.
We got one question actually from a viewer who's been a big fan of the wrestlers that they wanted me to ask you, Damian. And this comes from Dan Ball, who says,
Thank you.
After watching last night's episode of The Wrestlers, I thought it was a well-balanced effort to capture the big variety and even bigger characters that DDT brings to wrestling, even capturing footage of the elusive Lingerie Muto. Was there anyone Damian wished there was more time for in the episode? As a longtime DDT fan, it was too bad Poison Sawada Julie was not around the company at the time of filming.
Yeah, there were certainly other wrestlers that I think would have been really cool to focus on. I think one of the things that we would have liked to have done, timing-wise, it didn't work out, was more focus on kind of a foreigner coming in, a gaijin coming in, and just this idea that this is a place where, you know, someone like a Mike Bailey, who's not allowed into America right now, can kind of go and just be free and do his style of wrestling, or someone like a Joey Ryan or someone like Kenny Omega. It just seems like a place where these wrestlers can kind of go and find themselves. And we were talking to some of these wrestlers, and it just, you know, was so chaotic, especially because we were trying to film 3 episodes at once.
Mm-hmm. I would have loved to have seen you in the middle of the pool party.
I would have loved to have been at the pool party. The campground show, there was just, you know, if we had been in time for the train show, that would have been amazing too. You know, DDT is a company that just feels like it rewards you as a fan. Like Wai and I went to the bar they have their own bar, John, where I'm sure you're going to go when you're over there. It's called Dropkick, and wrestlers actually tend bar there, and they're showing Samurai TV, and fans go and they own their own bottles of whiskey and they hang out together. It really is like an immersive reality kind of place, DDT.
This was also the episode that I felt there was a lot more sketches from you, including you're sitting down and interviewing Yoshihiko as the credits are rolling, and then we go right into the next episode where it's looking at Canada's First Nations people, and it was very jarring, Damian, to go from one to the next.
And once again, I didn't pick the track list and how these episodes were going to be
I don't know
played.
how you would have followed up with Yoshihiko, honestly.
It's tough. That's really the crescendo.
Yeah.
I think this is also the episode where we eventually just went with it, you know, like it was just so, you know, such a weird, complicated world that eventually we were just like, let's just get caught up in the storyline and just kind of fall into it. Like, so it's almost like at a certain point, the wrestling reality becomes the real reality. And I was like legitimately worked by the film crew, as I found out, because they knew that Takagi-san's wife was going to come out there and do a spot, but I had no idea. So when she came out, I was like, what? Like, I was shocked.
Your
like,
reactions,
really...
again, like make a lot of these matches. So I'm glad they didn't tell you.
Yeah, I mean, in this one, on Wrestling on Canada's Reserves is what we're moving on to, and I realized that Damian reacting to Tournament of Death versus Damian reacting to fireworks going off on Canada Day, it's a straight line in terms of your reaction level.
Those fireworks were the most dangerous thing I experienced while shooting this TV show. Forget the glass in Japan. Forget, like, all the stuff we had to deal with in the Congo. This is the most dangerous thing. Those fireworks were so low when they were going off. You were getting hit by the gunpowder as it was shooting out of the fireworks.
This episode took you to places like Waskaganish, places like at the furthest perimeter of Quebec that probably no one has ever ventured to willingly, unless you're with the CWF group running these shows on various reserves. And I mean, this is a pretty deep episode, Damian, because you're going into Canada's, you know, very troubled history with Native Americans in this country, like First Nations people, and it's not a pretty history.
No, and it's not a pretty present too. I think that was the other thing.
Right.
Like, it's fun. I was just talking to someone right now about it before you guys called, and it's amazing when you can read about something and you can really think you understand something. Like I thought myself to be really aware of what the situation was like for a lot of young people on the reserves throughout Canada and Nunavut. But until I was there and kind of got to witness how the environmental devastation has affected these people, how just the isolation has affected people, it really hit home. It's the most expensive episode we had to make too. Like just from cost of travel, cost of accommodation, and cost of food. Like a bucket of KFC in Kajirlapek, which is Great Whale, which is where we went, which is the furthest we went, is $80.
Mm-hmm.
And
What?
a combo from
Jeez.
and it's like 20 some odd dollars for a combo.
Because
And
it takes so much to get the food. Like some places you have to literally airlift the food to get there, and the markup is enormous to cover just like it's these areas of Canada that are, you know, I'm sure many of the people, they feel like they're forgotten from their own country.
Oh, I was sitting there talking to Kayla, and I'm like, you know, we were talking, and she's like, yeah, there's like a lot of stuff I really want to do. I'm like, oh, what's some things you really want to do? She's like, I'd love to play video games online because there's no high-speed internet, right? So this entire concept of playing these video games online or getting downloadable content is just something kids and it seems like such a small thing, but it's just something that you just wind up taking for granted, you know? Or like the fact that you talk about the food and the fact that it has to be flown in. For years, it could be driven in over these ice roads, but now these ice roads don't freeze over because of global warming as long. So they don't have as long a window to drive goods in. And that's also not just food, but consumer goods, anything like that. So it's really, you know, increased the kind of pressure on these goods and the cost for these goods and things like that. And also traditional ways of life and traditional means of sustenance like hunting and fishing are gone because these natural reserves of these animals are depleted.
It's an episode that really kind of showed me how little I knew about my own country, because I'm sure this, you know, these stories are shared by many First Nations people all across Canada. And in particular, I thought the inclusion of Tim from a tribe called Red I really enjoyed, because he, you know, as a lifelong pro wrestling fan, was able to talk about how he kind of had to look outside of, like, you know, people that looked like him for representation in professional wrestling, going as far as, you know, to say it was the Ultimate Warrior he felt like he could find some identity with, not because he was, you know, a First Nations guy, but simply because he represented a warrior. And, you know, as an Asian Canadian, I feel like I've been kind of lacking representation in mainstream media, but even as an Indigenous person, I imagine that problem might be even greater.
It's not just with people, Indigenous people or people of Asian descent. It's like you talk to anybody, it seems like wrestling provided a lot of representation, or at least a way of having or feeling like you were being represented in media for young people, you know. And you talk to Black people when in the Congo episode talking about, you know, seeing Booker T or MVP or just any sort of African American wrestler on TV. It was, you know, those are their wrestlers that they're seeing on TV, and it's just, once again, I think speaks to the universality of wrestling, that it can provide representation for all different types of people. But yeah, no, it definitely was really important to have Tim there, and I'm eternally grateful. He drove 22 hours by himself.
Crazy.
To be there just because he loves wrestling, and he'd always wanted to see these guys, the Fabulous Freebirds, who actually would come out to a Tribe Called Red song. Like, that was the other thing that never really came across, unfortunately, in the edit, is that Shadow was like very much a kind of a fan of Tim's, and Tim had been a fan of Shadow's just through hearing about him wrestling for years. And so to kind of see them come together was awesome.
Sorry, I missed that in the episode. They call themselves the Fabulous Creebirds.
He was part of there was a 3-person tag team of Cree wrestlers in Winnipeg called the Fabulous Creebirds, who Shadow,
That's
I don't know
awesome.
if he's one of the original members, but he certainly was a member for a time of the Fabulous Creebirds, he told us.
Shadow Extreme I found to be a really interesting character, because, you know, you look at him as a wrestler, does not have the physique nor the charisma that I think you've come to expect from a typical wrestler, but he seems to be a major role model to these kids that are watching him, because simply, you know, by fact of being a wrestler of Indigenous descent, but it seems like even more importantly, somebody who has stayed away from alcoholism and drugs, which, I mean, in the community already seems to be an achievement.
He's an amazing human being. Like, he was someone that, you know, I hit it off immediately after, just as soon as we met. You know, he's a guy who, and he's had like ridiculous matches. He wrestled AJ Styles in Winnipeg.
Wow.
And, you know, like he's been around for a long time and paid his dues in Winnipeg. And he's someone who I think has been really beaten down by the fact that he can't catch a break in wrestling. And so, you know, these tours are a place where he's, you know, really found a connection. And to see the connection that he has with the kids that come out to these shows, it's a more important connection than any other wrestler I witnessed while making this show anywhere. Like, even in Mexico and in Bolivia, like we talked with the Fighting Cholitas, like the actual one-on-one connection that he has with people like Kayla, who you see in the episode, is it's just so profoundly important.
I also found it really fascinating that, not only do we kind of get your perspective on the whole kind of situation from like sort of a Canadian perspective, but we also get the perspective of somebody who's even further outside of that bubble in Keito Kiyomiya, who was on excursion from Noah
and is now their GHC champion
and basically like somehow found his way a part of these tours.
Well, he told us that he was actually like, and this is once again, we didn't actually know a lot of what he was saying until we got back and had the tapes translated, because there was no one there that spoke any Japanese. And he did speak a tiny bit of English, but really he's kind of experiencing this whole thing in isolation. And so the interview was conducted with him completely in Japanese and just kind of like Google Translate, trying to give him the questions, just saying, say whatever you want to say, we'll figure it out later. And it was amazing getting back and looking at what he thought and just being like, wow, this guy is taking it all in on a way that, I would not be able to take it in if I didn't speak the language. He told us he was trying to replicate Marufuji's excursion. When Marufuji came to, Marufuji did an excursion where he went to Niagara Falls for a time and wrestled. And that's what Keito did, but he instead got with the CWF and ended up going on this incredible trip. And yeah, it was awesome sitting there in these like very small hotels, just like watching YouTube links, waiting for them to buffer forever, but then watching YouTube links of old Japanese wrestling with them.
And of course, this all builds up to the father versus son match with Jesse Bieber and his father, who is also the promoter that runs the CWF group, Frank Reichman, who have one of the more violent matches that we have seen outside of your deathmatch episode, where these two killed each other on like a family show that I don't know if the match really suited the room, but I guess they made sure to lay it in.
Suited the cameras.
I guess so. Maybe they thought, man, this is your big break, Jesse. You're going to get on Vice.
They were awesome to have us on that trip. And like, Chris Thorne trained with, what's his name? Skinner. He trained with all like the legit Florida guys and can lay it in. And his son definitely came up wrestling with his dad, so his son can lay it in too. So when they went out there and had this, barn burner of a match for this audience that really just wanted to see people play musical chairs, I was so stoked. That was just such an amazing experience to kind of watch happen. But the kids got into it too,
The musical chairs thing got over big.
Huge. It was, it was the musical chairs. You really get to see how there's these certain things that are universally adored by children everywhere. Like that would have gotten over in Mexico, would have gotten over in Bolivia and the Congo. It would have gotten over, maybe not in the Congo, but it would have gotten over pretty much everywhere.
Well, that is where we are heading next week. It is the season finale of The Wrestlers, another night of back-to-back episodes where we are going to get voodoo wrestling in the Congo, followed by body slamming homophobia in Mexico, starting at 10 Eastern next Wednesday night. And it's a big treat for us because next Thursday here on the Hangout, Damian returns live in studio.
I do, and we're going to try and reenact the opening spot from the Congo episode.
I'm going to say no to that because I am aware what happens in this episode, and I am not going to agree to anything of the sort.
Can you give us a little preview, Damian? What for people who have no idea what wrestling in the Congo might look like for both of these episodes, what could we expect?
Absolutely. I think these are, two of the most, mind-blowing episodes for me to make and hopefully for people to see. Once again, kind of an awkward kind of lead-in for the Exoticos episode, but the Congo episode, wrestling in the Congo features magic, and this is something that developed over decades now, and every wrestler who wrestles is a witch, and you wrestle for free, but you wrestle for the opportunity to demonstrate your power as a witch. So the magic used will vary. Sometimes it'll be just freezing your opponent. Sometimes it'll be, making the referee go into a trance and do a dance. And then it escalates to Lauren Shakira, who opens the episode with a mid-ring castration of her opponent.
Oh, this will be a first.
Of those.
A live
And it goes from
castration
there.
on Viceland next week. So tune in early, everyone.
It sounds
goes from
amazing.
there.
It sounds amazing. And
It is.
This also has
really
the one scene I saw that I was genuinely fearful of your life, even though I know you survived it. But we will talk about that as well, of you going into business for yourself. And I don't know what you were thinking.
trying to get out of that situation alive. I thought that was my best play, but we'll talk about that next week. And then the Exoticos episode deals with, an area of wrestling that I think is very misunderstood, very controversial, and that is Exoticos, which is historically a sector of lucha libre that was used to mock gay and effeminate men, that throughout the late 80s and into the 90s was fought for as a space for gay men to be open with their sexuality by wrestlers like Cassandro and Pimpinella Escalata. But now in the present day, there's a bunch of wrestlers who no longer see themselves as Exoticos, but want to be recognized as luchadoras, but are not allowed to because their gender's not recognized by mainstream lucha. So it's a very interesting episode, and we really get to sit down with like a Mount Rushmore of wrestlers in this field. Like it's amazing. I'm really excited for people to see this episode. It's one of the most beautiful episodes too.
Well, we look forward to sitting down to one of the people on the Mount Rushmore of great guests that we always get to have. That's you, Damian.
Guys.
So we look forward to it. The Wrestlers, next Wednesday night, tune in, 10 Eastern, back-to-back episodes to wrap up the first of maybe many seasons, as Damian has been very generous with his time, and he will be on for one final time next week, live here in studio. Damian, thanks as always for stopping by, and we'll chat with you next week.
Can't wait.
All right. There we go, everyone.
A rather tame closing from Damian.
I know. I was waiting for it. I wasn't ready. Before we get out of here, we should go over the two big cards that are coming up this weekend. We've got Ring of Honor on pay-per-view Friday night. Man, I don't sense a whole lot of buzz for this show.
Well, I feel like there are three promotions putting on shows this weekend, and I would say Ring of Honor seems to be at the bottom of the three in terms of buzz.
I mean, they largely have the night to themselves on Friday night. I don't know how much. It's actually funny because, man, it's been like 3 or 4 ROH pay-per-views now where I always get together with Mike to watch them, and I always invite Mouth to come over and watch. And he's always got a gig, or he's got Trash Palace or something going on, and he's busy. And then this week, the week I'm away, he messages me, "Hey, what are you doing for Ring of Honor on Friday?"
Oh.
And I was like, damn, I'm going to be out of the city. So let's quickly go through the card, and then we'll spend a bit of time on Fyter Fest. It's headlined by Matt Taven versus Jeff Cobb for the ROH title. I really believe Jeff Cobb should be their top guy with the title. I don't see a title change here, especially with Cobb going into the G1, but he would be the guy I would be going with right now. I think Ring of Honor needs to really shake things up. They are in a lull at the moment, and I think that they are in a very deep hangover period after that Madison Square Garden show where things hit a certain peak point, and now they're really going through the effects of the loss of talent and just the fallout of it. I think it's become a product that lacks that buzz.
So what do you think they do with this booking? Because if ultimately Jeff Cobb to you should be that guy and he's about to go into the G1, is this just poor timing for a match like this?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens on Friday. Maybe they could do a fast one, but I think that they're going with Matt Taven as their heel champion throughout the summer, and then maybe this leads to something in the fall, or maybe he's going to hold it until Final Battle. I don't know. I don't get the sense they're going to be taking the title off of him. Shane Taylor defends the television title against Bandito. Silas Young versus Jonathan Gresham. That's going to be a pure rules match. Dragon Lee versus Dalton Castle, which is like a weird stylistic one. Marty Scurll, PCO, and Brody King defending the 6-man tag titles against Tracy Williams, PJ Black, and Mark Haskins. Nick Aldis and a partner to be announced versus the Briscoe brothers. This was going to be Colt Cabana. He's hurt, and they're going to announce during the pre-show who his partner is. And whoever the partner is has also joined the NWA. So he's going to be figured into NWA stuff going forward. The Allure, Mandy Leon and Angelina Love will take on Kelly Klein and Jenny Rose. Jay Lethal versus Kenny King. And on the pre-show, Flip Gordon versus Roosh.
Yeah, I'm surprised that one's on the pre-show, actually. It's one of the ones I would probably look forward to a bit more.
That's at 8:30 Eastern on their Facebook page, and if you order the pay-per-view, I think it's going to be on the pay-per-view providers. But yeah, I don't sense a whole lot of buzz for this show at the moment, or for the product.
Sure, it'll be a solid card. You know, the talent is incredible. But in terms of buzz, not necessarily up there.
Saturday night, we shift our focus to Fyter Fest from the Ocean Center in Daytona Beach, Florida. The buy-in, which starts at 7:30 Eastern.
I don't know if it's been explicitly said, but they're telling people to tune in for 7:30.
Okay.
Basically.
So I guess we have 2 matches officially announced for the buy-in, where it's Chuck Taylor and Beretta against Scorpio Sky and Frankie Kazarian versus Private Party in a 3-way tag. Winners advance to All Out for an opportunity at a first-round bye in the AEW World Tag Title Tournament.
So the tag title tournament is not taking place at All Out. Is that what we're...
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So
Tony Khan's indicated the tournament will start on TV.
Right. I mean...
It sounds like there will be a match at All Out where the winners of that match, whoever's in it, get that first-round bye.
Yeah, I think we made sense of it by now, but does it make sense that basically this team has to win 2 matches in order to get a bye?
It sounds like a lot of hoops. Yes.
To get a bye, anyway. But that's besides the point. The match should be good.
I think so.
I'm looking forward to seeing Private Party.
I think Private Party should win.
I think so, too. I mean, you can really kind of go any way.
I'd go with the new team.
Yeah.
I think they need it. Michael Nakazawa and Alex Jabali in a hardcore match. I'm going to be coming back and watching this Sunday night. If I'm in a real crunch, I'm skipping right through this. I have no interest in this.
I mean, it's really one for the CEO crowd that'll really mean something to the live audience, less so for the AEW audience at large. It's something that
it's on the pre-show.
It's something they were supposed to do last year that they didn't get to do. So, I think it'll be fun for the live audience.
So I guess that somehow a graphic came out for Leva Bates versus Kylie Ray, but that is not officially
I believe ITV
announced.
put it out.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe that'll happen. Maybe it won't.
Maybe.
They are doing the librarian storyline, so maybe Leva Bates will have the match with Kylie Ray.
Sounds like it'll be a pretty long pre-show if they're going to do all 3
matches in an hour can be a little tough, but it's doable.
Doable.
Yeah.
Sure. We'll see.
Then we go on to the main card. Yuka Sakazaki versus Nyla Rose versus Rio in a 3-way.
Looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing more of Yuka Sakazaki, parachute pants from the last show.
Nyla Rose probably serving as your base.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing all 3. I mean, I feel like Nyla Rose has been the one to get the most attention in terms of promotion. So I could see her winning, but I could also see Rio winning for the upset.
I could see Rio winning this. Christopher Daniels versus Shima. I think that this should be really something fun to watch.
Yeah, the 2 veterans. I'm sure it'll be great to see 2.
What did you notice anything distinct last year about the audience? Like, was it different than your typical wrestling crowd, or did you feel they were all kind of up to date on who the people were?
They felt rather pretty up to date. Again, it was also a video game crowd too that reacted really well for Jabali and his spots. But especially for this show, I imagine it to be very similar to your typical AEW crowd.
Hangman Page, Jimmy Havoc, Jungle Boy, and MJF in a 4-way. I think Hangman Page should be winning everything before the finals. That's fine. And
getting the pin probably over MJF.
Probably giving some shine to Jungle Boy. And probably everyone will get their spots. But I think that it should be Hangman winning 100%.
Yeah.
Then we have Jon Moxley versus Joey Janela. This has now been labeled a non-sanctioned match, which plays to the strengths of both.
Really slick little video that they released just today, I believe, with Jon Moxley essentially kind of his retort to Joey Janela's promo. I mean, this has been a build that's been built. I mean, all these matches have been built incredibly simply, but I would say
3 promos.
This one may be the best with Moxley and Janela just cutting 2 excellent promos on each other, and this is the match.
I think this is a big match for Joey Janela to kind of carve out his kind of place in AEW and have that big performance, which he hasn't had yet.
It's big for Moxley as well, because I think this is the style of match that, will be the closest thing. I mean, they're essentially promising CZW Jon Moxley in this. If you watch the
right
promos,
before he's supposed to do the hardest tournament in the world.
It's crazy. But, I mean, this is a non-sanctioned match, so you can expect a lot of weapons, which kind of plays to the strength of both men.
And probably blood.
Yeah.
I think they'll do blood. Do we see the United States title around Moxley's waist as he walks out?
My guess is no.
I say no, too.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to get any reference to it.
Yeah.
Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks against Pentagon Jr., Rey Fenix, and Laredo Kid. I do like that, again, Double or Nothing. I think we're going to get a lot of variety of matches, stuff that looks different. And this, I think people know what to expect here, and it'll be pretty high quality.
I think this will be a lot like the All-In main event with Bandito.
Will this be the main event? I think it will be.
I think so too.
I think Kenny
I
being
think
in the
Kenny
main
has
event
to be in
has
the
to
main
be.
event at the CEO show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. But I think it'll be an incredible showcase for Laredo Kid, who seems to be the brand new person who the rest of the crowd might not be familiar with. It'll be nice to see Kenny and the Bucks team up again.
Now, I mentioned that variety, and I think Cody and Darby Allin, they will have the challenge of being different from Moxley and Janela, because I think that this is a match for Cody to win, but to also get across like both men's toughness, and to Cody to have to wrestle a Darby Allin style match.
Does Cody necessarily have to win? Is it more important for Darby Allin to get that win because like you could have somebody get involved in the result to build up to the fight for the Fallen match?
I think Darby can get over big by just being this guy with no fear, and even in losing, he kind of gains the respect of Cody and has a great showing. But Cody is the guy you're pushing. You're doing that tag match in a few weeks, so I believe Cody wins this match. But Darby is kind of positioned as kind of higher than maybe people perceive. I think this should be a match that works well, but it is a very awkward styles clash.
A bit awkward, but
I'm looking forward to it.
Interesting.
So that's the show coming up, and that'll be up on Saturday night. Way and Davey Portman will be live. If you are a Double Ice Cap or Espresso member, you can watch and listen to that show live. Link will be sent out during the show, and then the podcast version up early Sunday morning.
Also on this weekend, W.H. Park and Chris Thunder from Down Under will be talking about night one of the New Japan Pro Wrestling Southern Showdown card, which looks to be excellent as well. On our website, though, on Friday night, Mike Murray will have a written report for the ROH show, so we'll have everything covered.
Yes, and Eric Marcotte from the forum, he's going to have a UFC report Saturday night up on the site, so we'll have that covered as well. I've delegated this weekend. I'm very happy to look forward to all this great stuff that we have.
Enjoy a rare weekend off.
And for myself and Way, before I take off this weekend, one more show coming out on Friday with Rewind Away, number 39. Way and I are going to review In Your House Canadian Stampede from July of 1997. That was chosen by Espresso executive producer Brent Nickel, who will join us as well for a great chat. He was awesome.
He was amazing.
Yeah,
yes.
Really great. And a great story about selling a steer. That's all we have to let everyone know about. So that's it. I want to thank Damian Abraham, Brian Mann, and all of your calls today. I wish we had more time to take some because everyone wanted to talk about this. But I am sure Monday and Tuesday night after Raw and SmackDown, we are going to have lots and lots to talk about news-wise. It's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks for WWE, as it always is. So thank you. And Way, as they always say,
what?
Goodbye.